The grand hall of Sterling & Co. gleamed under crystal chandeliers. At its center hung Autumn Whisper valued at $80 million. Champagne glasses clinked. Laughter echoed off marble walls. Then a small voice cut through the celebration. "That painting. It's fake." Heads turned. Lily Carter, 13 years old, daughter of the housemaid, stood beside the beverage cart. She pointed to the frame's corner where light caught something wrong, a strange reflective layer beneath the varnish. Edward Sterling, the CEO, froze, then smirked. "What did you just say?" Lily lifted her chin, calm. "The varnish is wrong. It can't be authentic." Whispers rippled through the crowd, then silence fell. An expert stepped forward with a UV lamp. The room held its breath. Purple light swept across the canvas. A blue-green fluorescence appeared impossible in an original from that era. In that moment of collective shock, a girl with nothing had just shaken an empire. Lily and her mother lived in a small room beneath Sterling Tower. Martha Carter had worked as a maid there for 12 years. She spoke little, moved carefully through the building's corridors, and never asked questions she didn't need answered. The room was narrow, tucked behind the boiler system where pipes hummed through the walls day and night. But it had light not from windows, but from the paintings Martha brought home. Discarded pieces from estate sales frames found in alley dumpsters, canvases left behind by tenants who never returned for them. Lily grew up surrounded by the smell of linseed oil and the soft whir of the dehumidifier her mother ran constantly to protect the art from moisture damage. While other children played in parks, she sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, watching restoration videos on a borrowed tablet, learning to identify authentic craquelure from artificial aging, studying how light moved differently across oil paint versus acrylic, memorizing the signatures of minor masters whose work appeared in auction houses. In a wooden box beneath her narrow cot, she kept her grandfather's notebook. He had been a restoration specialist at a small museum before arthritis claimed his hands and his livelihood. The last entry, written in shaking script that trailed off the page, read, "Art only lies when people lie." She had memorized every symbol, every notation about pigment composition and primer layers, every warning about forgeries he'd encountered. Once, while helping her mother clean the archive room on the 12th floor, Lily watched staff members in white gloves carry in a painting labeled Private Collection Marine Darker 12. She noticed immediately. The varnish layer was too uniform, too perfect. No natural crazing. No yellowing in the recesses where age should have pooled. The surface reflected overhead lights like glass, not like something that had weathered 6 decades of existence. "Mom," she whispered, tugging Martha's sleeve. "That one's not right." Martha's hand tightened on her shoulder fingers, pressing hard enough to leave marks. "Don't be curious, sweetheart. In the world of the wealthy, fake things are often more real than the truth. They prefer beautiful lies to ugly facts." Lily said nothing more that day. But her eyes never stopped watching, never stopped cataloging details. She began taking notes in the margins of her grandfather's notebook. Delivery dates. Shipping labels with custom stamps that didn't match the claimed origins. The names of galleries that appeared again and again in paperwork, always the same, 3 rotating like a shell game. She sketched the paintings beside her grandfather's entries, marking discrepancies in brushwork technique, in canvas weave patterns, in frame construction methods that didn't match the supposed periods. Martha found the sketches one evening while folding laundry on Lily's bed. "Lily, you have to stop this." "Why?" "Because people like us don't question people like them. We survive by staying invisible, by keeping our heads down and our mouths shut." Lily looked up at her mother, pencil still in hand. "Grandpa taught me to see the truth. I can't just unsee it because it's inconvenient." Martha knelt down on the cold floor, taking her daughter's small hands in her work-worn ones. "Your grandfather also taught you that the truth is expensive, baby. We can't afford it. Not on what I make. Not in our position." But Lily kept the notebook hidden under her mattress, kept watching through doorways, kept learning from every painting that passed through those halls. Because somewhere deep inside, she understood what her grandfather had known in his bones, that authenticity wasn't about price tags or provenance papers sealed with wax. It was about what remained when you stripped away everything false, everything designed to deceive. And in Sterling Tower there was so much false it had become the foundation itself. Sterling Tower blazed with light that could be seen from blocks away. Crystal chandeliers worth more than most homes cast prismatic rainbows across marble floors. The guest list read like a directory of power collectors, auction house directors, art critics whose words could make or break careers, and investors who measured beauty in 8-figure increments. Edward Sterling stood at the center of it all, tall and commanding in a tailored tuxedo. His speech echoed through the hall with practiced confidence. Sterling & Comers doesn't merely purchase paintings. We acquire history itself. We preserve legacy. Tonight you stand before Autumn Whisper, a masterwork by Claude Morin unseen by the public for 40 years. $80 million brings it home to America where it belongs. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. The painting hung spotlit against burgundy velvet, its autumn leaves seeming to tremble in the golden light. In the corner, nearly invisible among the servers, Martha carried a silver tray of champagne flutes. Lily walked beside her mother, helping to clear empty glasses and replace cocktail napkins, wearing the simple black dress Martha had sewn from clearance fabric. They weren't supposed to look at the guests. Weren't supposed to be noticed at all. But Lily's eyes kept drifting to the painting. Something was wrong. The light hit it at an angle from the spotlights above, and where the beam caught the varnish, there was a faint sheen, a blue-green iridescence that shouldn't exist. She'd seen it before in her research and warnings her grandfather had written about modern synthetic varnishes applied to fraudulent works. Her heart began to pound. Claude Morin had died in 1959. The chemical compound that produced that particular fluorescence wasn't developed until 1965, marketed to restoration studios as a quick-drying alternative to traditional resins. The painting before her couldn't be authentic. Martha whispered sharply, "Lily, keep moving. Don't stare." But Lily's feet had stopped. Her mind raced through everything she'd learned, every test, every marker. The varnish was wrong. The crepe-lueur pattern looked printed rather than naturally formed. Even the frame seemed too pristine for something supposedly kept in a private collection for decades. The words came out before she could stop them. "That painting is fake." Her voice wasn't loud, but in the momentary lull between conversations, it carried like a stone dropped in still water. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Edward Sterling's smile froze on his face. He turned slowly, scanning the crowd for the source of the interruption. A prominent art critic, Gerald Hartwick, laughed a sharp, dismissive sound. "Are we taking authentication advice from children now? Perhaps we should consult the caterers on investment strategy next." Laughter rippled through the crowd, nervous and relieved. But Lily stepped forward, her hand trembling as she pointed toward the painting's upper corner. "The varnish. It has synthetic polymer fluorescence. You can see it under the spotlights, that blue-green reflection. Marin died in 1959. That type of varnish didn't exist until 6 years later. It's impossible for this to be his original work." The laughter stopped. Edward's face darkened. He strode toward her, and Lily felt her mother's hand grip her shoulder like a vice. "Who let this child in here?" His voice was ice. "Who is responsible for this disruption?" Martha stepped forward, voice shaking. "Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry. She's my daughter. She didn't mean any disrespect. Please, we'll leave immediately." But someone else had moved. Dr. Chen, the authentication specialist Edward kept on retainer, approached the painting with a UV lamp pulled from his jacket pocket. His face was serious professional curiosity overriding social protocol. "If I may, Mr. Sterling." Edward's jaw clenched, but he nodded sharply. Dr. Chen switched off the nearest spotlight and activated the ultraviolet lamp. Purple light washed across the canvas. The room held its breath. Bright blue-green fluorescence bloomed across the varnish layer like algae on water, unmistakable damming impossible to explain away. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Chen's voice was quiet, but everyone heard him. "She's correct. This fluorescence pattern is consistent with polyurethane-based varnishes introduced in the mid-1960s. No painting from Morin's lifetime should exhibit this signature." Someone's champagne glass hit the floor, shattering. No one moved to clean it up. Edward Sterling stood frozen, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and something that might have been fear. The painting he'd unveiled an hour ago as the crown jewel of his collection, the symbol of his taste and power, hung there like an accusation. He turned to look at Lily. Really look at her for the first time. not as an interruption or an embarrassment, but as the person who had just detonated a bomb in the center of his world. His voice came out hoarse, barely controlled. "Who the hell are you?" Edward Sterling didn't sleep that night. He stood in his office on the 42nd floor, staring at the city lights below, phone pressed to his ear. It was 3 a.m, but desperation didn't respect time zones. "Dr. Morrison, I need you to tell me I'm not losing my mind. The Autumn Whisper in my possession, verify its authenticity. Now." There was a long pause on the other end. Dr. Rebecca Morrison, Director of European Paintings at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, cleared her throat. "Edward, I don't know how to tell you this gently. The original Autumn Whisper is here. In our conservation lab. It's been here for 8 months undergoing restoration. We have full provenance documentation, chemical analysis, everything. Whatever you purchased, it's not Marin's work." The phone nearly slipped from Edward's hand. "That's impossible. I have certificates, authentication papers, a complete chain of custody from the original buyer in 1961. Then someone forged very convincing paperwork. I'm sorry, Edward, but the real painting never left our possession. The family loaned it to us directly." He hung up without saying goodbye. The sun rose over a different world than the one he'd known the day before. By 9 a.m., Sterling & Co.'s stock had dropped 12%. By noon, every major news outlet was running the story. "Billionaire's masterpiece exposed as fraud" by Maid's daughter. Social media exploded. The video someone had taken on their phone, Lily's small figure pointing at the painting, the UV light revealing the truth, went viral within hours. Meanwhile, in the basement, Martha Carter packed their belongings with shaking hands. "We have to leave Lily. We have to disappear before this gets worse." But before they could go, security arrived. Not to escort them out, to bring them to human resources. The HR director, a severe woman named Patricia Voss, looked at Martha with cold eyes. "Mrs. Carter, you're being terminated effective immediately. Bringing unauthorized persons into a private corporate event, allowing disruption of a high-value function, and facilitating potential corporate espionage." "Espionage?" Martha's voice cracked. "My daughter told the truth. How is that espionage?" "Your employment is terminated. You have 2 hours to vacate company housing." Lily watched her mother's face crumble. Watched years of careful survival shatter in a sentence. That night they stayed with Martha's sister in a cramped apartment 40 minutes away by bus. Lily couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the authentication papers, the provenance documents, the certainty with which Edward Sterling had presented that painting. Someone had fooled him. Someone with access, with knowledge, with the ability to forge documentation that could fool experts. The next morning, while Martha was in the shower, Lily took 2 buses back to Sterling Tower. She knew the building's rhythms, knew when shift changes happened, when loading docks were busy enough that a small figure could slip through unnoticed. She made it to the 12th floor archive room using her mother's old access card, not yet deactivated in the bureaucratic confusion. The authentication files were kept in fireproof cabinets, but Lily had watched staff open them hundreds of times. The code hadn't changed in 3 years. She found the Autumn Whisper file and photographed every page with her phone. Purchase order, shipping manifest, chemical analysis report, expert testimonials. Then she found the original invoice from the Milan gallery. At the bottom, in small print, partially obscured by a coffee stain, "Reproduction for educational purposes only. Not authenticated as original work." Someone had cut that line from the official documents. Someone had filed paperwork that made a legal reproduction look like a genuine article. She kept digging. Found more files. More paintings with similar patterns, purchases through the same 3 galleries, always with documentation that felt too perfect, too clean. And every transaction had been approved by the same signature, Richard Lang, Chief Financial Officer. Edward Sterling's best friend for 15 years. Lily printed the evidence, stuffed it in a manila envelope, and wrote on the outside in her careful handwriting, "You were betrayed. The truth is expensive, but lies cost more." She left it on Edward's desk and slipped out the way she came. 2 days later, Edward sat in his office with the envelope's contents spread before him. Each page was marked with red ink in a child's careful hand circles around discrepancies, arrows pointing to doctored figures, Notes in the margins explaining technical details that only someone who'd studied restoration would catch. He'd hired 3 forensic accountants to verify what she'd found. Every single detail checked out. Richard Lang had been running an art fraud scheme for 7 years using Sterling & Co. His reputation to sell high-quality forgeries at authentic prices, laundering money through fake auctions and offshore accounts. Millions of dollars, dozens of paintings, all under Edward's nose. When he finally called Lily, his voice was different, smaller. "I need to speak with you. Please." They met in a coffee shop, neutral ground. Martha sat beside her daughter, protective and wary. Edward looked at this 13-year-old girl who had destroyed and saved him in the same breath. "Why did you help me after what happened to your mother? After everything?" Lily met his eyes without flinching. "Because if the truth stays buried, my mom gets blamed for your mistakes. And because my grandfather taught me that authenticity matters more than comfort, even when it hurts." Edward was quiet for a long time. Then, "I'm going to make this right. All of it." He called the police from that table. Gave them everything Lily had found plus everything his accountants had uncovered. When Richard Lang was arrested at his country estate 3 days later, he smiled at Edward through the police car window. "You really going to let a maid's kid destroy everything we built?" "Eddie." Edward didn't answer. Just watched his oldest friend disappear down the driveway, realizing he'd never truly known him at all. 3 days after Richard Lang's arrest, Lily received a message through her aunt's phone. A driver would pick her up at 10 a.m. Edward Sterling wanted to meet. Martha almost refused. "He's already taken enough from us." But Lily saw something in the message that her mother didn't, a question mark where there used to be periods. Uncertainty where there had been commands. The driver brought them to Sterling Tower but not to the executive floors. Instead, they went to a small conference room on the 3rd floor, the kind used for job interviews and performance reviews. Simple furniture, no windows overlooking the city, no power plays. Edward was already there, standing by the table. He'd aged in the past week, new lines around his eyes, gray showing at his temples that hadn't been visible before. "Thank you for coming," he said, and gestured to the chairs. "Not an order. A request." Lily sat down. Martha remained standing behind her daughter, one hand on the back of the chair. Edward sat across from them, and for a moment, nobody spoke. Finally, he asked the question that had been haunting him. "Why did you help me? You could have walked away, let me drown in this. After I had your mother fired, after I humiliated you in front of everyone. Why give me the evidence?" Lily's answer was simple, direct. "Because if the truth stayed hidden, my mom would be the one who paid for it. You would have needed someone to blame and were easy targets. But also because lies compound. They spread. If nobody stops them, they become normal." Edward leaned back, studying her. "You're 13 years old. 14 next month." "You're 14 next month," he corrected himself, "and you understand things that I spent 53 years avoiding." Martha's voice cut in sharp with protective anger. "Mr. Sterling, if you brought us here to make yourself feel better about—" "I brought you here to apologize." Edward's voice was steady, sincere. "And to offer you both something that doesn't begin to make up for what I've done, but it's a start." He slid a folder across the table. Martha opened it warily. Inside were documents. A full-time position as building services manager, triple her previous salary. Immediate reinstatement of benefits. An apartment in a Sterling-owned residential building, rent-free for 5 years. And a college fund in Lily's name. Martha stared at the papers, then at Edward. "This is guilt money." "Yes," he admitted. "It absolutely is. But it's also recognition that I destroyed your livelihood to protect my ego, and that your daughter saved me from something far worse than embarrassment. She saved me from becoming completely lost." "I don't understand," Martha said quietly. Edward stood, walked to the window, hands in his pockets. "The internal investigation that Lily's evidence triggered. We've found 37 fraudulent paintings in our corporate collection. Richard didn't just betray me. He betrayed every artist whose work we claim to honor, every buyer who trusted our authentication, every person who believed Sterling & Co. represented integrity." He turned back to face them. Your daughter saw what was right in front of me and had the courage to say it out loud. She risked everything for the truth. That's not something I can repay with money, but refusing to try would make me even more of a coward than I already am. Lily spoke up. What happens to Mr. Lang? Federal prosecutors are building their case. Wire fraud, money laundering, art forgery conspiracy. He'll go to prison for a very long time. Edward's jaw tightened. He was my best friend since business school. I trusted him with everything. And he used that trust to build an empire of lies right under my foundation. Did you ever suspect? Lily asked. Edward was quiet for a long moment. I think I chose not to see. The paintings were beautiful. The profits were good. Questions would have been inconvenient. Your grandfather was right, art only lies when people lie. I let myself be lied to because the lie was prettier than the truth. He sat back down, meeting Lily's eyes directly. The forensic accountants found something else in Richard's files. He kept notes. The Marin reproduction, the one you identified, he'd been planning to expose it himself. Anonymously. After I'd already announced it publicly, already staked the company's reputation on it. He wanted to watch me fall. Martha's hand tightened on Lily's shoulder. You stopped that, Edward continued. By speaking up when you did, you exposed the fraud before he could weaponize it. You saved the company. More than that, you gave me the chance to choose truth over comfortable denial. Lily looked at the folder, then back at Edward. I'll accept this on one condition. Edward raised an eyebrow. You're negotiating with me. You have to sign these papers with your real name, not your title, not CEO or president or whatever. Just Edward Sterling person. A smile ghosted across his face, the first genuine expression Lily had seen from him. He pulled out a pen and signed at the bottom of each document. His handwriting was surprisingly simple, almost humble. Edward Sterling. No titles, no armor, just a man who'd been taught a difficult lesson by someone he'd tried very hard not to see. As they stood to leave, Edward offered his hand to Lily. She shook it, her small hand disappearing into his, and felt something shift between them. Not forgiveness exactly, not friendship, but the beginning of understanding. The story broke wide open 3 days after Richard Lang's arraignment. Art fraud empire toppled by Maid's daughter, ran the headline in the New York Times. The Washington Post called it the most unlikely whistleblower in corporate history. CNN looped the viral video on every news hour, Lily's small figure pointing at the painting, the UV light revealing impossible fluorescence, the shocked silence that followed. By morning, Sterling Tower was surrounded. News vans lined the street. Reporters camped outside the employee entrance. Helicopters circled overhead, filming B-roll of the building where it had all happened. Social media exploded with hot takes and think pieces. Maid's daughter trended worldwide. Artists shared stories of their own encounters with forgeries. Former Sterling employees came forward anonymously with suspicions they'd buried for years. Martha stopped answering her phone after the 50th call from producers wanting to tell their story. She kept the curtains drawn in their new apartment, terrified of cameras, of attention, of the spotlight that felt more like an interrogation lamp. Lily watched from the window as reporters prowled the sidewalk below, hoping for a glimpse, a quote, anything to feed the endless news cycle. We should never have stayed, Martha whispered. We should have taken the settlement and disappeared. But that option had evaporated the moment the first news anchor called Lily a hero. Edward Sterling faced the cameras alone. The press conference was held in Sterling Tower's main atrium, where the fake Autumn Whisper had hung just 2 weeks before. Now the wall was empty, a rectangle of darker paint marking where the fraud had been displayed. Edward stood at the podium without notes, without the confident smile he'd worn for decades. I'm here to take full responsibility for the failures that allowed this fraud to flourish under my leadership. Sterling & Co. was built on a promise of authenticity and excellence. I broke that promise through willful ignorance and misplaced trust. The reporters surged forward with questions, but Edward raised his hand. A 13-year-old girl saw what I refused to see. She had the courage to speak truth to power when everyone around her, including me, tried to silence her. Lily Carter didn't just expose one fake painting. She exposed a culture where appearances mattered more than reality, where we valued reputation over integrity. He paused, and for a moment his carefully controlled expression cracked. She taught me that authenticity isn't comfortable, it's not profitable, it's not convenient, but it's the only thing that actually matters. Everything else is just expensive lies. The questions came rapid fire. What about the other paintings? How much money was lost? Would there be lawsuits? Criminal charges beyond Richard Lang? Edward answered each one directly, admitting failures, accepting consequences, refusing to deflect blame. Then came the announcement that made international headlines. Effective immediately, Sterling & Kober is establishing the True Canvas Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to art authentication, education, and fraud prevention. We're funding scholarships for young people from underprivileged backgrounds who want to study art conservation and authentication. And I'm personally endowing a full scholarship to the London Academy of Art in Lily Carter's name, available to her if she chooses to accept it. After the press conference, Edward found Martha and Lily in the quiet conference room where they'd been watching on a monitor. He handed Lily an envelope. Inside was a formal letter of acceptance to one of the most prestigious art schools in the world, along with documentation for a full scholarship covering tuition, housing, materials, and living expenses for 4 years. "You don't have to decide now," Edward said. "But the offer stands. You have a gift that shouldn't be wasted cleaning up after people like me." Lily looked at her mother, whose eyes were filled with tears she refused to let fall. "There's a condition," Lily said. Edward almost smiled. "You and your conditions. You have to promise that the foundation isn't just publicity, that it actually helps people, that you don't use it to rebuild your reputation and then forget about it when the cameras leave." "I promise," Edward said. Then more quietly, "I'm tired of building things on lies, even well-intentioned ones. If I'm going to spend the rest of my career fixing what I broke, it has to be real. Otherwise, what was the point of any of this?" That evening, as Martha and Lily returned to their apartment through a side entrance to avoid reporters, they found a small package waiting at their door. Inside was a framed photograph, the moment captured on someone's phone when Lily had pointed at the painting. Her face was serious, certain, unafraid. Behind her, the crowd was a blur of shock and disbelief. A note was tucked inside, handwritten on Sterling & Co. letterhead. "The real masterpiece is honesty. Thank you for showing me what it looks like." No signature. But Lily knew. She placed the frame on the small desk in her new room where it caught the morning light. 1 year passed, and Sterling Tower stood transformed. The lobby no longer displayed paintings chosen for their price tags. Instead, rotating exhibits featured emerging artists, authenticated, documented, and honest about their origins. Small brass plaques told the truth about each piece, including restorations and previous misattributions. Edward Sterling launched a lecture series called The Price of Authenticity. He spoke at universities, business schools, and industry conferences, telling the story of his downfall without softening the edges. He didn't make himself the hero. He made himself the cautionary tale. At one such event at Columbia Business School, he stood before 200 MBA students and said, "I built an empire on the assumption that if something looked valuable, it was valuable. The person who taught me otherwise was a 13-year-old girl who had nothing to lose by telling the truth, and everything to lose by staying silent. That's the lesson none of your textbooks will teach you. Courage doesn't come from having power. It comes from having principles you won't abandon, even when staying quiet would be easier." The True Canvas Foundation had awarded 43 scholarships in its first year. Students from Detroit, rural Appalachia, immigrant communities in Los Angeles, young people who'd never imagined they could access elite art education, now studied restoration, authentication, and conservation at top institutions worldwide. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Lily Carter stood backstage at TEDx London, adjusting the microphone clipped to her collar. She was 14 now, a first-year student at the London Academy of Art. Her accent had picked up British inflections. Her confidence had grown. But her eyes still held that same quality, seeing what others missed. The stage manager gave her the signal. Lily walked into the lights and began, "People only see what they want to believe. We're surrounded by beautiful lies every day, and most of us choose comfort over truth because truth demands something from us. It demands courage. It demands we risk being wrong, being embarrassed being the person who ruins the party by pointing out that the emperor has no clothes. She spoke for 12 minutes about authenticity in a world designed for deception. About how forgeries weren't just about art, they were about the stories we tell ourselves, the reputations we protect, the convenient fictions that let us sleep at night. My grandfather wrote in his notebook, "Art only lies when people lie." But I've learned something else. Truth only exists when someone is brave enough to speak it, even when everyone else in the room wishes they'd stay quiet. The applause was thunderous. Backstage afterward, a production assistant handed her a small envelope that had been delivered to the venue that morning. Lily opened it. Inside was a single card, expensive paper, simple message. The real masterpiece is honesty. No signature. But she recognized the handwriting now. That evening, she video called her mother, who'd stayed in New York in her new position, managing Sterling Towers facilities, a job she loved, finally visible after years of being deliberately unseen. "How did it go, baby?" "It went well, Mom. Really well." Martha's eyes were shining. "Your grandfather would be so proud." "I think," Lily said softly, "he already knew. That's why he left me the notebook. He was teaching me to see long before I understood what I was looking at." After they hung up, Lily sat in her small dorm room overlooking a London street surrounded by textbooks on pigment analysis and conservation technique. On her desk sat 3 objects, her grandfather's notebook worn and annotated, the photograph from the gala, that moment of truth frozen in time, and the card Edward had just sent. 3 artifacts of transformation. Outside her window, the city hummed with evening traffic. Somewhere in those streets were museums full of masterpieces, galleries full of frauds, and people who'd never learned to tell the difference. But Lily had learned, and now she was teaching others. One authentic voice at a time. In her small London room, Lily worked on a new painting. The subject was simple, a young girl holding a UV lamp over an old canvas. Purple light spilled across the surface, revealing blue-green fluorescence. The girl's face was illuminated from below, her eyes wide with recognition, the moment before everything changed. Beside her easel sat her grandfather's notebook, pages yellowed and soft from handling. She'd read every entry so many times she could recite them from memory. Her phone buzzed. Martha's face filled the screen. "How's the painting coming?" Lily stepped back to show her mother the canvas. "Almost finished. What do you think?" Martha was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "Are you proud of what you did?" Lily considered the question carefully. "No, I'm not proud. Pride feels like it's about me. But I feel clean. Like I'm living honestly. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense, baby." After they said goodbye, Lily signed the bottom corner of her painting in careful script, L. Carter, Authentic. Late afternoon sun streamed through the window, catching the still wet paint. The surface was rough, uneven, imperfect oil applied with visible brushstrokes, no artificial smoothness, no attempt to hide the hand that created it. She cleaned her brushes and stood back to examine the finished work. In the painting, the girl's expression held no triumph, no vindication, just clarity. The simple recognition of what was real and what was false, and the quiet courage to name the difference. Lily understood now what her grandfather had been trying to teach her all along. There were things that didn't need to be brilliant to be valuable. They only needed to be true. Outside her window, London moved through its evening rhythms. Somewhere in that city were masterpieces and forgeries, truths and lies all existing side by side. But in this small room, there was only what was real. And that Lily had learned was more than enough. In a world dazzled by wealth and status, it's easy to forget that the most valuable thing isn't the painting itself, it's the truth behind it. Lily had no power, no credentials, no reputation. She only had eyes that could see, and a heart brave enough to speak what was right. That courage shook an empire, and taught a powerful man how to be honest again. Her story reminds us that truth doesn't need to be loud to exist. It just needs someone brave enough to look directly at it, and say it out loud, even when silence would be easier, safer, more convenient. Sometimes the people society treats as invisible are the ones who illuminate the darkness that power tries so hard to hide. Edward Sterling built his world on beautiful lies. Lily Carter dismantled it with simple truth. And in doing so, she proved that authenticity isn't about perfection or prestige. It's about having the courage to be real when everyone around you has chosen to be false. If this story makes you believe that honesty still has a place in an age of deception, leave a comment about a moment when you chose to speak the truth, even just once, even when it cost you something. Subscribe to Maid's Daughter Stories, so you never miss tales where ordinary people do extraordinary things. Each video is a reminder sometimes one small voice is enough to change the entire world.